everyone, welcome to Belgrade, Serbia. It is Michael here with Offshore Citizen, and I am going to talk to you today about a subject that I don't know that it necessarily comes up as a specific question, but I think it comes up as an implicit question quite often. And that is the subject of how do you know if your tax structure is legal? So one of the things that I find myself very often having to spend a bunch of time on is just educating people on how what they're thinking isn't legal. And it's a really important thing. There's a lot of bad articles out there that are telling you horrible information that could get you into trouble. You get kind of a lot of bro wisdom, what I would call, which is basically, a friend of yours says something and they really don't know what they're talking about. Or there's some bad advice just from various people out there. Some people who are fairly prominent and well known, some publications that are well known. So I want to talk today a little bit about something which is really, really challenging because, of course, you're not an expert in the field. And when you're not an expert in the field, how do you know, right? So this is really the subject, like I said, of how do you know if your tax structure is legal? Either what you're doing now or what's being proposed and what somebody else is telling you, okay? And this is where it helps to go back a little bit and look at some of the other videos that I've done so you can have a bit of a framework. I try to explain some of the underlying concepts that are going to trip you up and give you things, almost like a checklist you can go through and say, is this the case? Is this the case? Is this the case? Is this the case? Which is exactly what we do when we're going through and working with a company, right? We'll say, okay, let's look at this area. Let's look at this area. Let's look at this area, etc. Okay? So let's just start by kind of rehashing the basic pieces to make sure that whoever it is that is giving you advice or whatever article you're reading or whatever is addressing these points. And then I'm going to get into some of the ways that you know or can know with at least a reasonable degree of probability what the case is. And by the way, unfortunately, you can't even, you can look at PwC has been under fire for giving, a structure that is potentially evasive to Caterpillar, right? So you've got a Fortune 500 company with a supposedly top 4 brand name firm. You have some similar things with PwC in Isle of Man. There was some tax structures that there was a lot of illegalness around, and you don't want to be in that situation, okay? So what are the areas? Well, first of all, residency, okay? Where is the company resident versus where is it registered? This is probably the first thing that I see people get wrong, and so it's one of the most common things that I see. And on top of that, it is something that's fairly hard to navigate, okay? So this is simply, all right, a lot of people will come to me and they're like, I'm gonna set up a company in Hong Kong, or hey, should I set up the company in here? It's like, well, if the corporate residency rules you're dealing with go based on management and control, then it does not matter where you are forming the company, okay? You can form it anywhere, from Bahamas to Cayman Islands to Hong Kong to Cyprus to wherever, you're screwed, okay? That's it. It's like, or it's not that you're screwed, there's ways to work around that, but just forming the company doesn't matter, okay? So you can't just form. Generally speaking, if anyone's telling you, hey, you're just gonna form a company, it's a bad idea. It's not gonna work. It's a problem, okay? What is the number 2 part? And so you have to pay attention to management and control. And you can go and look at our videos on corporate residency, or you can contact us and we can discuss it with you. The second thing that is very important is source income, okay? So I was talking to somebody yesterday, I believe. I had a consultation call, and they were talking about, okay, well, where should we set up our headquarters? Here's where our team is. I'm like, well, do you have any employees in this place where you're setting up? No, our employees are here and here. I'm like, well, how are you possibly going to make the argument if the owners are not there, the employees are not there? Like, where does it look like the income is sourced in this particular case? Okay, and again, you can go and you can watch our video on source income, and yes, it varies by jurisdiction and type of income, etc. But if you're not paying attention to corporate residency, and if you're not paying attention to source income in whatever structure it is that you're doing, there's a good chance you're getting yourself into trouble, okay? You must have income sourced in the place that should be taxable, right? And if the income is sourced somewhere else, you're at some kind of risk. And there's ways of separating that out, right? There's transfer pricing arrangements. There's all kinds of different things that companies can do in order to shift their source income, but it must be reflective of substance. Most of the time, if somebody's giving you just a form without any backing, without any substance, chances are that's going to get you into trouble. Okay, chances are. Okay, so that's the second part. The third part is controlled foreign companies rules. Okay, if they're not paying attention to controlled foreign companies rules, then now the truth is this one's a little bit more tricky because a bunch of countries don't have controlled foreign companies rules. Okay, the easiest way to find out is to look up the Deloitte tax highlights. Okay, you can just Google Deloitte tax highlights, whatever country it is you're looking at. They have a PDF, and you can scroll down to the part on controlled foreign companies, and it will explain to you whether there are any controlled foreign companies rules in that country. And it applies they have highlights on most countries, maybe, I don't know, 160 of them or something, right? So there's a few that they don't have, but for the most part, you can do that pretty easily to say, oh, yes, there are CFC rules or there are not CFC rules. Okay, so if they're not paying attention to that, then there is a risk, it's not a certainty, but there is a risk that you could be getting yourself into trouble. And, again, the first one and the third one, I find are the ones that tend to get people more often than not. And you have to watch for that, okay? Now, what's the next part? Well, generally speaking, if somebody has a one-size-fits-all, pre-baked, this is the strategy, then chances are you should be afraid, because the tax rules say between Australia and Germany and Canada are different, okay? So I'll give you a simple example. I tend to like Labuan these days, okay? Labuan has some good qualities about it. It's a place that I can set up a real office, I can hire staff, we're fairly low cost, I have relatively good banking, I have relatively low taxes, etc. Okay, so there's a bunch of reasons that we like Labuan. However, Labuan is excluded from the tax treaty with Australia. Okay, so that's going to be an issue. If you're in Portugal, they're on the CFC blacklist. Okay, so it rules you out. It's not an option for you, or at least not necessarily it's not an option, but there are going to be some consequences to it. So anyone who has a one-size-fits-all strategy, you should probably run away from. And it's frustrating for clients. It's frustrating for me to deal with people who make inquiries because they're like, what should I do? I'm like, well, what you really have to do is you have to do a proper analysis of your situation, find out where your customers are, look at where your employees are, look at where the management and control of the company is, look at the rules in your particular country, compare these to the rules of the countries you're dealing with and what the applicable treaties are, if that's relevant. Look at how is it that you accept payments? What are you going to do about banking? Are there any shipment fulfillment issues? Are there regulatory issues? Are there, all these different things? And based on that, we can come up with the optimal structure for you. But that process is going to take some time. It's going to take some investment, and it's going to be worth it in the long run because you're going to get something that's solid, whereas you might not get something solid otherwise. Okay. So this brings me into the next part, which is when those people do the analysis, they should be able to cite for you the laws that are relevant in your particular situation. Okay. Now, it's a little bit tricky sometimes when you get into case law, okay, because basically you have statute and you have case law, right? Statute is basically what's written in the actual law, and often it's a little more vague, it's a little more open to interpretation, it's harder to figure out. And so, depending on what country you're in, etc., then you'll get some case law which clarifies that. So I'll give you a specific example. Malaysia says they only tax source income, all right? Great, they only tax Malaysian source income. But they don't define in statute what source income is. And there's actually a few countries that do this sort of thing, all right? So you have to go to case law to figure out, okay, well, how do they treat this? And even in case law, there can be some blurred lines. So there's a bunch of things with US tax law right now that are a good example of where it's just not that clear, right? Things haven't gone to court, the laws are new, etc., right? So undeniably, there's going to be some court cases that are going to challenge this, and you're going to have some clarity that will come out of those. But until that happens, there's going to be a bit of uncertainty. Unfortunately, so what you're going to try and do is you're going to say, okay, well, based on the laws, here's how we're going to assess the risk. we're gonna, play it on the safe side, so we're gonna set this up, etc. So hopefully we're gonna be safe. But the point is, anyone who's not citing you specific law and can't back it up in law, I think, you're probably in a situation where that's not the best person for you. I'll give you an example of this as well. In Portugal, they have something called the non-habitual residency scheme, NHR, all right? They also have a CFC blacklist, okay? So under the NHR, dividends are supposed to be tax-free, all right? However, companies owned by, that meet the CFC criteria of Portugal, who trigger this blacklist, are therefore, there's a tax associated with it. Now, you can go to two different lawyers in Portugal, and they will tell you two diametrically different things, okay? And neither of them should you really put too much stock in, and I'm going to explain why in a second, okay? So the one will say, let's give an example that's very real, very specific, very common. Somebody moves to Portugal, they have a Hong Kong company, all right? Okay, you've got a Hong Kong company. Maybe you're paying zero tax, okay? Now, Hong Kong happens to be on the Portuguese blacklist as of the time that we're filming this right now. So in the future, who knows, maybe it changes, but that is the case, okay? All right, so you don't pay any tax, it's on the blacklist. Do you have to, deal with the CFC consequences of that, or can you bring those dividends in tax-free? This is the question, okay? Now, what some lawyers will say is they'll say, no, you're NHR, and under NHR, that's not going to apply because dividends are tax-free. Somebody else is going to tell you, whoa, you got to be careful because that company is in a country that's on the blacklist, and that can cause you problems, okay? Now, which of these two is right? Well, the truth is, statute is not clear, okay? The NHR rules, if you read the actual laws, which I have done, it does not state anything about the CFC rules. They are not mentioned in there. So it's completely up to somebody's opinion. You get multiple legal opinions on this, which can be diametrically opposed to each other. And you're either going to say, okay, let's structure it in a way that's safe. So that would be our approach, right? Our approach would be to say, hey, look, we're going to assume that it is an issue. The truth is, I can't tell you 100% that it is. And anyone who's telling you in that situation that this is the way that it is, they can't say that because it's not in the law, right? There's no court cases that have gone to court to deal with this issue yet. And so we don't know, right? We can extrapolate some ideas. We can say, okay, some people argue, they'll say, hey, look, Portugal is doing this to attract wealthy investors. They're not going to burn those investors, etc., right? That's a argument, right? Another argument is, hey, Portugal's got a lot of debt and is short of money, and when they need the cash, they're going to go after these guys, right? Maybe yes, maybe no. These are opinions, right? These are not legal facts that are going to drive your situation. So, the way that we do it is we say, okay, let's not deal with any blacklist country. Let's structure it so that it's fully in compliance with both the NHR and the CFC rules. And that way, at least you're safe, right? Maybe it turns out that you're going to end up paying a little bit extra tax because of it, but at least you're safe. Okay, so this is just an example of where being able to go to the law is very important. And that's what the beauty of law, right, is that you can actually go and read the law. It's not like, there's some study that you have to do, or you have to take some measurements, which you're not sure whether it's the right time of year. There's various different things, say in science, that the data can be quite blurred because it's a very complex issue, right? Here, there is a text that says exactly what the text says, and it's the same for you and for everybody else, right? And you can go and you can read that. And then there is, okay, how does that get interpreted from a case law standpoint, which is not going to fundamentally contradict, it's only going to clarify that issue. So bottom line, going back to a recap here, how is it that you know that your structure is legal, or at least put yourself in a position where you weed out most of the ones that are illegal and clarify as much as possible? Number one, if they're not paying attention to corporate residency, specifically looking at the risk of management and control in one form or another as a corporate residency issue, that's a problem. Number two, if they're not paying attention to source income, that is a problem. Number three, if they're not paying attention to CFC rules, then you better check to make sure CFC rules don't apply in your particular situation. All three of these could cause issues. And there's some other things as well, but these are the easy ones to check off, right? There's transfer pricing, there's withholding taxes, there's thin capitalization, etc. There's general anti-avoidance, there's, in the case of some diverted profits tax in the case of the UK, and, things like this. But at least those you want to pay attention to. Then you want to make sure that they're not giving a one-size-fits-all solution and that they're in a situation where they're backing it up by citing appropriate laws that you can actually read the law and you can actually see, oh yeah, that's the case. Sometimes you can supplement that as well with the government tax office website. Sometimes they'll have guidance. For example, the ATO has pretty clear guidance on their website. And you can say, okay, great, here's how they say. And sometimes in the case of the US, the Department of Treasury will release some guidance. And so you can look at that, and obviously that's a fairly authoritative text. So those things there are pretty much what you should be looking at. And so long as you follow that, you're putting yourself in a pretty solid situation. Of course, not without being an expert, there is still some opportunity for error, but you're eliminating the majority of it. So I hope that's helpful to you. If you'd like somebody to look at your structure and say, hey, how does this fit? Is this valid? Is this invalid? By all means, please reach out to us. If you like this video, please click like, subscribe, check out some of our other videos. I'm going to look forward to seeing you guys on the next video.